All love vibrations is Tulu fellow Bongan Khadeba, the Lenyora of the sky. Zulu Tulu here to talk to you about profit and purpose. It's the grand question. As a born artist, as a born creative, it's been a huge question in my life, in a sense of, can you profit off of your purpose? And the answer is yes, and it's been a lifelong journey of actually discovering that and realizing that, but also this is also an educational journey for myself. We've done a bit more research on the topic and been able to figure out, is there a way that we can put together a formula? So what is purpose? That is the question. Your purpose can be defined by where you fit in the world and what path you are meant to evolve in the ecosystem designed by the Most High. So we are all made with a grand design. We all come from a people who have a certain grand design that's supposed to fit in this whole ecosystem of life. Now, at the end of the day, we are also living under capitalism. Now, the problem is, the challenge is, capitalism is atheist. So the goal is to turn capitalism into a believer in you. So when we can even talk about profit or wealth, right? There are different types of profit. So when I'm talking about, can we profit off of our purpose, the first level we're thinking about is finance. Now there are many ways where your purpose can lead you towards finance. Now, when I talk about it even from a personal perspective, as I was developing in my own personal life, what I noticed is I can be mediocre in conformity or excellent in my truth. Now, when you follow your truth, that doesn't mean you follow a path without challenges. You are trying to fit your unique shape in this cog of systems that's trying to make us all look the same, act the same, and talk the same. So now the goal isn't to just be unique for unique sake. It's to actually honor the light that was specifically given to you. So now when I got to the understanding that, through surviving a depression, of trying to fit into what people might even say is a safer path, I actually started blooming the moment I had fully embraced that I am a creative individual. I'm a creative individual, and through actually enduring the journey and refining my specialty at being able to think, envision, and actualize, right? I found the different industries that this one skill set can fit into. And that's what it is. That's the difference between a purpose and a job title. A job title has a finite, definition of what it is and where it can fit. But when you understand purpose, when you understand the specific light that you were given, that can fit across various industries, various countries, and various contexts, because human need is universal. You understand? So let's break it down and even talk about, okay, what are the different facets of finance, what are the different facets of wealth that we could be talking about? So obviously finance is essential, but time is also wealth. Health is wealth. Knowledge is wealth. Meaningful relationships are part of wealth and are part of what comprise of a lucrative life. So there's health, there's safety, there's mental wealth, there's character development, there's emotional well-being, there's relationships, community, status, wealth of time, spiritual wealth, and adventure. And your purpose can give you all of that. You understand? So that's the difference between living in purpose and living in a charted path. Now, there's nothing wrong with the charted path. Some people find their purpose in a charted path, but essentially, being a person who's living by purpose can sometimes mean that you're going against the grain for what society has designated for you, for your group, for your country, for the greater hands that are already trying to architect a certain type of society. Now, that's not even saying that following your purpose is adversarial. It's just that following your purpose is so unique to you that there will be resistance, because the world didn't just pave out a lane just for you specifically. So your talents and your gifts can contribute to a wealth of your life. And I think people like to often say things like, if you follow your passion, you'll never work a day in your life. Now, that's not true, right? But there's a truth in what it's trying to express. So creativity will feel like work. For instance, I'm using something that I'm more familiar with as an example. It will feel like work when you're locked in, because you actually have to let go of the temporary pleasures that your peers can be guiding you towards. And you need to make certain sacrifices to be able to actually lock in and really find the moments of insight, the moments of inspiration that focus can find within you. So it's not that you're not going to work a day in your life, it's that the work is going to feel so purposeful that you see the development, because the development feels personal. And then that's what makes it feel like it's not work. Because honestly, it's slavery most of the time if you're doing things that aren't developing and growing you. Because now you're doing that for a piece of bread, whereas you were designed to do something that is more than just a piece of bread. So that's what the slavery element doesn't only come from the suffering, it comes from the fact that we're being robbed of the original right of our lives. You understand? So now when you really step in and are afforded the privilege, because I do also think there is an element of privilege even in talking or exploring this idea, right? And I'm not going to pretend like I have answers for every human being on every level on how they can actualize this, but you can always take further and further steps to actually express your light and let that journey give you more value. So it's about understanding that you don't have work hours when you're passionate, you don't have work hours when you're in purpose, because the great idea that comes into your mind, or the great inspiration, or the moment of refining your craft, doesn't come from a place of obligation or of survival. It comes from a place of inspiration. It comes from a place of passion and interest and intrigue. And that is how it keeps you alive. You understand? So the real message that I'm trying to convey here is that, I mean, even at the time when South Africa was facing a large amount, which it still hasn't ended, a large amount of youth uncertainty, where unemployment was really on the rise and youth unemployment was really on the rise. For me, that was the moment of my greatest inspiration. And not because the system had charted out a path for me, which is what going to school, studying, going to varsity, that's the promise. The promise is that when you follow the system will provide a charted path for you. I was lucky to be an artist. That meant that my whole life people said that the journey that I want to walk is unsustainable. And it's not even that they were lying, there was always an element of truth in it. So I also understood that even though I'm serving such an important purpose in society is not necessarily going to provide safety for me in honoring my purpose. So when it came time for me to, like, I'm done in my varsity journey, and I am seeking something that's going to grow me, I understood that actually right now I'm given the gift and the privilege of time. And now, whilst I'm sitting at home, there's this opportunity for me to actually just pursue who I said I am. So I started writing scripts, and I started writing a book. And then that story that I was writing about, the life I had lived, and the lives that I had heard about through the different friends and the different experiences I've had, I synthesized that into a story. And now, as I release the story and I share it with my peers, I start gaining the interest and intrigue of my peers into my creative contribution. So that wasn't the typical career milestone, but you actually learn that institutional affirmation is not as good as getting actual people to rock with what you're offering. And then that's when you become a member of the institution as well, because you're also providing a need and solving problems for people, right? So I went from writing my own story, building my own audience, building my own creative organization, creative company, hosting exhibitions, hosting festivals, getting to a point where I'm also designing and contributing, working with other brands, working with different stakeholders, building my own CV. So I didn't wait for anybody to kind of hire me so that I can show that I have potential to contribute, I created my own platform for me and for others to contribute, and mobilize other people. And then that got me to this point thus far, where I am now still a leader in the creative sphere of the country, in a way that kind of suits me where I am currently. But to get more granular and to get more systemic, we bring it together, right? By understanding that purpose changes your life because you spend less time and money trying to impress the peers that don't profit you, and you spend more time networking with like-minded people that refine you. So that's already how it's already enriching your life, because the community that you're building around you is refining the truest you and your truest expression. At the end of the day, the highest form of technology is the human body, the human mind. And the highest experience is for you to experience the full potential of your human mind and your human body. So when you're in community with people doing like that, then you're on the precipice of really getting the value of being in purpose, and research purposeful people, because it's not always an easy journey, but it's worth it. I mean, life can already be difficult, but to choose the difficult path that actually benefits you and benefits your soul and your spirit, is actually the ultimate goal. So the Steve Bikos of the world, yes, he was murdered by a corrupt government, but at the end of the day, he left a legacy that actually goes generations. Now, are we honoring that legacy? That's a conversation for another day. Tupac also really showed that at the end of the day, there is a contribution that the downtrodden African American male can really contribute and come together, you understand, and use his creative mind to inspire people in the same way Bob Marley would have done, you know what I mean? And Van Gogh didn't really, unfortunately, didn't know the value of his work, but at the end of the day, he's still a name that we mentioned today, and he's still a source of inspiration for other painters, because at the end of the day, painting solves an existential problem more than it solves a physical problem. It solves the problem of us as human souls trying to figure out what are we here for and what are we doing, And now when you really get into the zone of yourself as a painter, people actually understand that we're also here to experience beauty, and not just, man cannot live on bread alone. You understand? So you do that, and you live your life the same way. They speak about Jesus. That's an actual person, and that's a person that existed, because outside of Christian um, outside of Christian documentation, the Romans and even the Hebrews of the time wrote about Yeshua. And then that's a person who felt like it's important to be able to communicate to human beings that they are more than their flesh, that they are actually a living vessel of consciousness. And he sacrificed himself for that. Now, at the end of the day, being a person of purpose is also about being a person of legacy. And your legacy is actually really about the impact that you leave on others. There's an element of selflessness in the word purpose in itself. Because at the end of the day, when you're serving a purpose, you're solving problems for other people. And then that's what exalts you and exalts you into a higher light. I don't even want to get to the point of talking about celebrities, but some of our favorite creatives have really solved existential problems for us and really helped us keep going and enjoy life in a greater way. And that is legacy in itself. And there's ways to profit off of that legacy. But I think when you're thinking on the basis of finance alone, you don't get the true inspiration, right? To really think of the idea that connects your solution with humans. You become out of context with your fellow man. Understand? But like I said, it's a choice that you make, and I always say the chosen ones are the ones who chose it for themselves. Just to make sure that we cover all bases. Some people are not really interested in us going beyond the finance. So let's just talk about maybe the ways to build yourself into a product, right? And make it worth it for yourself. At the end of the day, it's about expressing your purpose, expressing your talent, building an audience, and hey, turning yourself into a walking, talking billboard. At the end of the day, that is the business model of the day. So you turn yourself into a billboard and place a product in the midst of people actually engaging with your talent. There is no shame in that game, but there are more artful ways to play that game. So let me give an example of maybe somebody I'm not going to name, but somebody who's really making strides that I find admirable and giving you how I've analyzed what that person's business model is. So it's a photographer who's also an influencer. Now, when you're a photographer who's also an influencer who shoots other influencers, right? So you're shooting other influencers, which makes those influencers, those models, your clients. So now you're actually turning yourself into somewhat of a media hub. And a media hub, that means that you are a walking, talking billboard that is ad space and advertising space at the end of the day. So that's how you do it, through the social media. You build your following. You understand that actually some of my followers are my potential clients and customers, and you collaborate with your potential clients and customers, and what you've collaborated and built with said models, said influencers, becomes another product you can sell to advertisers, or to people who want advertising space. And now that puts you at the nexus, just right at the middle point, right, of your entire industry. Because at the end of the day, sharp, you're a photographer, right, but you're also an influencer yourself, which means you make the content about yourself, and then you have other characters that you collaborate with. Sometimes those characters pay you and say, hey, can you make something for me? And with all the things that you've made, you sell them to the corporations. The corporations try and put themselves in the midst of your product. You understand? And that is kind of like how people are doing it now. Yes, they're still pursuing their talent, but we're pursuing our talent in ways that are going to build an audience and make people look at us. And once we've got the eyes of the people, we've got the interest of the corporations. The corporations invest, and then that's how we make money. So if it all fails, that's really the way you can do it. And at the end of the day, that might just put you in the space where you gotta make sure you're selling sex, beauty, lifestyle, because at the end of the day, especially when we're speaking from a social media perspective, that is what they've put in the algorithm. And mostly when we're capitalizing, we're taking a wave that already exists, right? An interest that's already there, and riding it. So do your best to really understand what purpose that you want to serve, what profit you're really looking for, and understand what would make a fulfilling life for you. It's all love, it's all love vibrations. That was our conversation about purpose and profit.